Jeff Nippard just proved the research wrong and he doesn't even realize it. In his latest 100-day low-volume experiment, he got stronger and more jacked while on a gentle cut, and the proof of his own experience destroys the whole high-volume model he's been preaching for years. Like, the irony is this: he literally proved his own beliefs wrong, and no one's talking about it. Everyone's focused on the results, but not what those results actually mean in the greater context, because what this experience shows isn't just that low volume works in a deficit, it shows that low volume works full stop. Now, I've been coaching lifters for 11 years and I've seen every trend come, go, and come back again. People have heard the idea that more volume equals more growth so many times that they don't even think about whether it's true. The big problem right now that we have in the evidence-based industry is that what people think and what the research says you should do when you're intermediate to advanced is drastically different from what I see actually high-level intermediates and advanced guys really do to build muscle on average across the board. So when I saw Jeff's results, I wasn't surprised at all. He ran exactly the kind of experiment that's been proving my point for years, and he did it by accident. So in this video, I'm going to explain exactly what Jeff's experiment really showed, why it goes against the research that he's always quoted, and what the maintenance literature really says about how little volume you need to maintain your gains on a cut. It's not much. And how his training split, his frequency, and his intensity all show us the same thing. Volume doesn't make muscles grow. It stops them from growing. Like, we'll just say that again, just for emphasis. It stops them from growing. Like, just stay with me, and by the end, you'll know why cutting down on your sets and working out harder might be the best thing you ever do in the gym. Now, I've got a lot to talk about in this video. I want to start off by talking about this false assumption that what builds the muscle should maintain it. It's another one of those cliches which is thrown around. This idea that you've got to keep the same amount of volume on a cut that you had on a bulk or maintenance phase is just completely false. Maintenance literature shows that you can retain muscle with a fraction of the training. So your maintenance volume and your general volume can be drastically different. The amount you need to retain your muscle in a cut is so much lower. And over the course of this video, I'm going to argue the case for why that could be a lot better. When your calories are low, the priority is your efficiency. Being laser focused on what the current goal is. The current goal on a cut should be to get completely fat-free and retain your muscle tissue. You can reduce volume massively during a cut and keep all your muscle. And I'm going to explain to you why that's a better choice. So that segues onto the next section, which is talking about why lower volume actually makes sense in a cut. So training burns very few calories compared to its recovery cost. You know, at this point, everyone's familiar with the stimulus to fatigue ratio. Now, in the last few years, most people have really discussed that in the realm of exercises and exercise selection. But when you look at stimulus to fatigue ratio, there is a broader perspective on the amount of volume you're doing. Now, we know that every set you do has a recovery cost. I think everyone would agree on that. But not every set has the same amount of stimulus. So you have diminishing returns, which set in quite heavily from set one on a given body part per day. Therefore, you don't have this equal relationship between your stimulus versus your recovery. So the stimulus of fatigue of more and more volume is always going to be negative. More volume will continue to add stress, inflammation, and fatigue with very, very minimum caloric impact, and also less and less growth stimulus, ergo diminishing returns per set. So we have a situation where the amount of volume you do on a cut will suffer from severe diminishing returns the more you do on a given day. However, it will still have the same recovery cost. Therefore, fat loss coming mostly from diet and cardio, not more sets, makes a lot more sense. The smart move is low volume, high focus, high effort, and high performance. Now that takes us on to the next session quite well. So that is answering the question, why did traditionally bodybuilders use high volumes? So I think obviously there's a drug equation. You know, you pile in a lot of drugs, you can probably recover from a lot, but I don't think that is everything, because I think you run into the same problems even if you're on drugs. So I think to answer that question, it's really more about practicalities. And I want to take you back because I was actually there. 30 years ago, I saw gyms before there was this massive fitness boost. And I can tell you, just from my experience, back in the 90s, there were two types of gym, and they were very, very drastically different. The first type of gym was where most regular people went to, and it was just 90% cardio machines, ellipticals, runners, joggers, rowers, everything, and probably 5 or 10% weight section. I remember my first gym, at the university that I went to in Liverpool was a LA Fitness. It had a very small lifting platform which could fit about 6 people at any one time. And the rest of the entire gym was cardio equipment. Now, you contrast that with hardcore gyms, it was the exact opposite. Hardcore gyms was all bodybuilding equipment. Free weights, machines, cables, dumbbells, and maybe 1 or 2 treadmills. Usually one was broken. So there was a stark contrast back in there. That was just the 90s. I imagine the situation was even worse in the 80s and 70s. So I think originally the reason that bodybuilders traditionally did mostly high volume training was because they just didn't have access to cardio machines like we do now. You look back at old videos of Arnold, he would tell you, go and run on the beach. And that's because they just didn't have access to the cardio machines where they were. It would probably involve a separate trip to a different gym for like normies to do their cardio. So I think high volume depletion training was just practical. I don't think they were under the impression that it was optimal. So the habit stuck, even though the rationale didn't make any sense. And this is what you see happen in most sports. You know, in most sports, you're just going to do what your elders did, because at least if you do that and you fail, well, at least you can say, well, I tried what everyone did and that's it. But if you try something completely new and you fail, there's always the stigma of saying, well, why'd you try something new? Why'd you bother? You should have just done it the way everyone's done it, the way Arnold did it. So it takes a lot to overcome the momentum. And if that's the way that Arnold did it, if that's the way that Samir Bannout did it, if that's the way that Tom Platz did it, you are just going to follow suit. It's very difficult to change the tide. So I think the popularity of higher volumes on cuts is just a remnant of days where you had gyms which didn't have the level of cardio machines that we do now in more mixed gyms. But with that said, let's go on to the next section and let's talk about the advantage of the modern method. What I try and do as a coach is to provide people with the most efficient route to their goals so that they can get there with the least suffering. Like, we accept if you're going to get very lean, you're going to suffer. But I would rather set you up with a system where it's the least amount of suffering. We want the least amount of fatigue for the most amount of stimulus in whatever we're trying to do. Now, anyone can grind out sets. It's actually quite fun, but efficient programming really will separate somebody who potentially finishes in good shape with somebody who finishes exhausted or maybe doesn't finish at all. Higher volume has such a large recovery cost. You could use that for your cardio or your dietary adjustment. And the thing about cardio is it doesn't really have the same level of diminishing returns as training does. Now, yeah, of course, there is some, your body gets better at moving, but generally speaking, there are far greater diminishing returns when it comes to lifting weights. So smart coaches will prioritize sustainable levels of intensity and volume over trying to burn off as many calories as possible via training. The smart approach, minimal training to preserve muscle. Diet will do the lion's share of the fat loss, and then cardio can be a nice way to top up and to sort of offset the metabolism loss of weight loss and just dieting in general and fatigue. And that allows us to segue quite nicely into fatigue. As you go into a diet, fatigue will distort your perception of effort. You might think you're training hard, but your output will tank. Now, I've had this before. I did a 6-month cut recently where I got very lean. By the end, when I saw videos of myself training, I probably wasn't training that hard. When I was actually in the gym, it felt like I was pushing all out because I was just so tired. Anyone who's been that level of leanness will tell you it's like walking through quicksand. You know, you're walking against a heavy wind. You know, everything feels 10%, 20% harder, but actually the effort you're putting out just doesn't look that great. So what we want to do is we want to make sure we're setting up training so that we are able to push as hard as possible. I will just briefly mention Marcora's psychobiological model of fatigue. It explains this exactly. The more tired you think you are, the more tired you are for whatever reason, whether it's psychological or biological, it will affect your perception of fatigue in the moment. So what you want to do ideally is accept the fact that you're going to be tired. What you want to do is you want to try and set up the training to be as efficient as possible. Remember, all we need is the minimum amount so that you don't lose muscle and you don't lose strength. And that is extremely low. I'll go over it later in the video. Low volume means higher quality work when you're depleted. So that's what I did. When I was dieting earlier this year, my volume was super, super low so that I could put all my effort into that one set that I was doing per exercise. It's all about perception of fatigue. And when you're in a diet, you are going to be fatigued. things are going to feel like you're walking through quicksand. So what you want to try and do is set your training up so that you have the best chance of success. And landing yourself with this high volume training is just not going to work as well. You will hold back. And that's true, by the way, whether you're on a diet or whether you're in a bulking phase. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is Jeff's splits. His split was this. He did upper lower rest, upper lower arms, delts, and then rest. So that means his arms and delts got hit 3 times a week, his chest and back only twice. I think this is an incredibly inefficient routine. He should have replaced the arm day with another upper day. You know, he had 2 full body touches for the big muscles. He could have done that a lot better. On any given day, you suffer from very, very sharp diminishing returns after the first set of the muscle that you do. So the research says you need something like 5 additional sets to match the growth stimulus from that first hard working set. So the first working set represents X growth. If you do 5 more sets on a day, that is 2X growth. Now, across the course of the week, if you do that again, that is 4X growth. So we've got 6 sets the first day, 6 sets the second day. That's 12 sets per body part per week, gives us 4X growth. Now, rather than that, what if he was to train a body part 3 times a week, but only for 1 set? That would give him 3X growth. Now, just bear with me. I know the math isn't exactly right, but I'm just trying to work with the research that we've got. Now, that would give technically slightly less growth, 3X versus 4X. But you're looking at the difference between 12 sets of recovery versus 3 sets of recovery per week. That is way more efficient. Now, even if you did 2 sets per body part 3 times a week, that's still 6 sets per week, which is half the volume of somebody who's doing 12 sets per week. It's way, way less to recover from. So what I'm saying with Jeff is he was training a body part twice a week for his chest and back and his legs. And he was doing roughly about 8 sets at the top end per body part. Now, a much better way to arrange that setup is just to do 3 uppers. Do 3 uppers with maybe 2 sets per body part. All the benefits that he got, he'd get all them and more because he'd have a much more efficient approach. He'd be able to train harder with less fatigue, with less recovery problems, getting better stimulus because of more first touches, more quality exposure. He could have done that so much better. And listen, Jeff does this full time. Quite frankly, he would have had a better time training 6 days a week and upper lower across all days because he could have had 3 first touches for every body part, or he could have had a better time doing just full body 3 times a week. Something like my wizard approach or just any good full body routine 3 times a week would have been a more efficient approach than the one he ran. So, I mean, Jeff's new to this, you know, he's new to the low volume stuff. Obviously he's taken full advantage and he's already written and released a book, but he's new to this. He doesn't quite know how to effectively do low volume, and he could have done that a lot better. So let's move on to the next part of this, which is looking more specifically at diminishing returns and frequency. So the first set of any session for a given body part produces a lot of growth stimulus. Any extra set won't add the same level of growth stimulus. It will add considerably less. Diminishing returns kicks in very strongly. You get far less benefit, but way, way more fatigue. You have the equivalent fatigue. 1 set gives you X amount of fatigue. 2 sets will give you 2X fatigue. Every set gives you equal fatigue. Okay, every set gives you equal stress on the joints, stress on the body's recovery, the glycogen depletion, everything. Okay, frequency beats volume. More first touches per week, fewer redundant sets. You spread that stimulus evenly instead of stacking your sets all in one go. No, I'm not saying this is the best approach all the time. Okay, quite frankly, I think upper lowers are quite good. I like them. I also think full bodies are good. I think training body parts 2 or 3 or more times a week is very, very efficient. All I'm saying is on a cut, remember the focus of this whole video. What should you do on a cut? You're trying to be as efficient as possible. Now, what I found is training body parts 3 or more times a week on a cut is fantastic. Full body 3 times a week for most of you will work really, really well on a cut. Or do what I do, which is 6 days a week, upper lower. But that's me. I really like training. Which then takes us on to the ideal low volume approach for a cut. Now, when it comes to the trifecta of intensity, frequency, and volume, there's always an argument about what's more important. My thought is intensity is the most important because listen, without intensity, there's nothing because volume is the number of hard working sets. So if they're not hard, you're doing nothing. Intensity is always first. Without intensity, there is nothing. You're just doing cardio. The more advanced you get, the more it benefits you to work hard and improve your ability to work hard in the ways that I'm highlighting in this video. Secondly, I would say frequency. Really, there you go, hand in hand, intensity and frequency. That's because of the effects of diminishing returns. Your first set is worth a lot. Get that first set in as many times as you can in a given week. And then volume is last. Volume is the least important. Volume is simply the strength of the signal, but intensity, that provides the stimulus. Without intensity, there is no frequency, there is no volume. Frequency is second because diminishing returns for training kicks in heavily, and volume is last. Do what you can recover from. So in terms of some effective templates, obviously 3 times a week full body is fantastic. I also have had a lot of luck with 3 uppers and 2 lowers. And I've also had a lot of luck with 3 uppers and 3 lowers. 1 to 2 hard working sets per muscle per session, which will give you about 3 hard working sets across the week. You can add 1 or 2 extra sets for priority muscles only. That's what I would say is a reasonably good approach to have the best balance between maximizing gains and recovery. Now that segues quite nicely onto the next section, which is looking at the flatness phase. So Jeff, in his video, he noticed that it took about 3 weeks to kind of fill out again. He said after 3 weeks, he felt like he was nice and full, and he almost felt like he was growing. So what you're going to find is if you've gone from a previously very high volume approach to a lower volume approach, especially if you cut calories at the same time, the lower volume will remove the inflammation, the edema, and the glycogen bloat, which you're getting from the higher volumes. So you're going to look flatter. However, if your strength goes up, and you feel like you're getting stronger, but you're looking a bit flatter, there's your answer. That says everything. That means previously you were just creating a lot of inflammation, a lot of edema, and a lot of glycogen. Glycogen is essentially, think of it as your fuel. Your body is very quick to adapt the level of glycogen in your body to higher volumes or to lower volumes. So if you change to a cut by reducing calories, reducing carbs, and also lower volume, you're going to have the net effect of looking a bit flatter, and that's going to make you feel fatter. But as Jeff found out, within 3 weeks, that all normalizes again, because then you also have the other side of things. The lower stress allows your glycogen to actually fill out your muscles, and you'll start to regain a nice level of fullness because you're not going to be just ripping through your glycogen every day. You're going to have a nice level of fullness after a few weeks, like Jeff found out. And I think people are just addicted to this temporary swelling. So moving on to the next thing is what actually creates muscle long-term. You know, getting rid of the swelling, getting rid of the edema, what causes muscle long-term? That is training hard. That's the real growth driver. I think Jeff finally trained with intent. So after his first 3 weeks were over, what he found was he was able to train harder, and that's what made it work. That's when he actually started to build muscle. Advanced lifters, make no mistake about this, advanced lifters progress through effort and intensity. You have to get stronger in your lifts. Advanced lifters will hit a wall with volume because, again, diminishing returns kicks in. 1 set, 2 set, 3 sets, 6 sets. It magnifies the amount of stress that you have to recover from on your joints, your connective tissues, on your entire system. Whereas weight can go up. You can get really strong. I know amateur UK bodybuilders who are pressing 5 plates aside on the Smith chest press, who are rowing 5 plates aside from the floor, who are squatting 6 plates aside. These guys are phenomenally big and strong. They are knocking on pro cards, the kind of thing that Mike Israetel should be aiming for. Those guys train brutally hard on fewer sets. Remember, this is not just about dieting. This is actually about what your long-term progress entails. The evidence-based community kind of reverses the hierarchy I've just laid out. They talk about volume being first, intensity being last. Jeff's experiment exposes the flaw. What I see on a consistent basis, what churns out absolute monsters is hard work. It's not a lot of work. Low volume will outperform higher volumes even on a bulk. The proper order is intensity first, frequency second, and volume is a dead last. The higher volume will actively pull you back because it will prevent you from working hard. Which actually leads me to my next point, which is Jeff's back pedal, which is it was quite funny because halfway through the video, he said something like maybe high volume is for bulks and low volume for cuts. That's him hedging. he should have learned the lesson. His results show that low volume works across all phases. So he made this mistake because he still hasn't learned. He still doesn't believe the evidence that's right in front of his eyes. If you get stronger during a cut, that's proof of the principle. You're getting stronger, you're getting more muscular in trying circumstances. When your body is under a gentle amount of stress from a gentle cut he was doing, he would gain even more in a bulk. His low volume approach wasn't even that low. He was doing about 8 sets per body part per week. It's my moderate range. He could have done the cut with less volume, and he could be bulking now with the same volume he was doing on that cut with, I would say, a more efficient setup like I outlined earlier, and he would do a lot better. Now, on that note, let's talk about what the maintenance research actually shows. So Jeff later cited a study showing maintenance on 3 sets once a week. That's 3 sets total per muscle once a week, not per session. And going back to the beginning of the video, it shatters what people are talking about when they say what built the muscle will maintain it. No, you can maintain on a lot less. However, what he actually did was 8 sets per muscle per week. For quads, he was doing about 4 sets twice a week. And for some of the body parts, he was doing a little bit less, but roughly in that ballpark. A smarter version for what he could do would actually be to do those 3 sets across 3 sessions. So 3 full body sessions, 1 high quality set per muscle each time. Same total weekly sets, you'd have better recovery, you'd have better stimulus. That's a better way to manage your stimulus to fatigue. And I've said it earlier on, his split was very inefficient. He could have done a lot better with a lot less, which would have opened him up to an even better, more efficient cut. So with what I'm recommending to him, which would be 3 sets split 3 times across the week, 1, 1, and 1. You get the same total weekly sets, better recovery, better stimulus. 3 total weekly sets done 3 times a week will beat 8 done poorly just twice a week or once a week. That study confirmed my long-standing point, not his. Now, Jeff ended with saying that he still thinks that when bulking, you could keep moderate volumes, but then you could blast one muscle with 30 sets per week. Jeff, that's pure nonsense. Come on, brother. Have you still learnt nothing? All you're doing then is you're recreating all your earlier problems. If you have a body part you're trying to specialize on, presumably a weak body part, Jeff's idea is to blast it with 30 sets. You're just missing the point of your entire experiment. You're going to lose focus, you're going to lose quality, and you're going to lose recovery. I mean, he even said it himself. When he was doing those high volume workouts, he would get distracted, go on his phone. So is that really what you want if you're doing a specialization cycle? No. So I'm going to just share with you how to actually do a proper specialization cycle. Specialization doesn't mean just slamming loads of volume. What it should mean is these things, 2 things mostly. First of all, higher frequency. Remember what I said, more frequent exposures. The more you can hit a muscle when it's recovered, the better you're going to be. And the second thing is smarter exercise variation. So what I want you to do is, if you're specializing, is different angles, planes, grips. Hit different muscle fibers within the muscle with different exercises. That's how you actually do it. So for example, if you wanted to specialize on the upper back, you would choose a combination of pull downs, rows with different grips, sagittal, frontal plane, across 3 times a week. That is how you could actually execute a proper specialization cycle. Not by slamming it with 30 sets. It's such an inefficient way to do things, because at a certain point, you're just going to get bored and you're not going to be able to exert the maximum amount of intensity, which is the most important thing. So all Jeff's approach does is it reintroduces junk volume. He's still trapped in his volume bias. He can't drop it because that's his brand. The evidence-based model clings to volume because it's easy to sell and it's easy to measure. The truth is that low volumes, higher intensities, higher frequencies, and smarter variation, that is what works, especially for naturals. You know, the data and his own experience, and from what I see of real-world lifters, all point the other way. All point to you being more specific and working harder. Like, his own experiment was a case study proving like my framework correct. So here's the final takeaway. Jeff's experiment proved the opposite of what he normally says. Low volume, high intensity, high frequency training isn't just enough on a cut. It is optimal. He just refuses to accept the evidence in front of his own eyes. I've been saying it for years. The research, the results, and the reality are now catching up. So my final message to the viewers is, you don't need to buy a new program or reinvent your training. Just work harder, train smarter, cut your sets down, focus, push your intensity, recover better. And if you're going to buy an ebook, buy mine. All right, guys, see you in the next one. Take care.